the UFC fighters with the strongest strength of schedule, guys. That's what I want to talk about today. We're going to go through a list of fighters throughout their UFC career that have faced the absolute cream of the crop, the best competition, the most former champions, just never shied down from a hard challenge and fought absolute savages their whole career. Let's get right into it, guys, starting off with none other than Rafael dos Anjos. If you know, you know. Rafael dos Anjos, been in the UFC since like 2007, 2008, and man, since this guy has been on the scene, he's fought some killers. He's fought Donald Cerrone 2 times, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Benson Henderson, Anthony Pettis, Eddie Alvarez, Tony Ferguson, Neil Magny, Robbie Lawler, Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman, Kevin Lee, Leon Edwards, Rafael Fiziev, Vicente Luque, Mateus Gamrot, Jeff Neal. Like, if that list is not the most impressive list in UFC history, I don't know what else is. That is absolutely insane, in my opinion. I think he has an argument for the #1 toughest strength of schedule out of any fighter ever, and that includes Jon Jones. He's faced 8 former champions. He's actually been a lightweight champion. He lost against Eddie Alvarez. He lost his belt. But man, RDA, I feel like he'd have beat Eddie Alvarez most of those fights. If they fought 10 times, he would have beat him probably 7 out of 10 times. He had a bad weight cut. Eddie Alvarez caught him. It is what it is. But RDA, the real BMF, if you just look at the fighters at the top of the screen, tell me that's not one of the most impressive strength of schedules you've ever seen. And although he was inconsistent, he still, whenever he was on top, he was impressive. He beat a Donald Cowboy Cerrone on an 8-fight win streak in his prime to defend his belt. That was pretty impressive. He destroyed Anthony Pettis to win the belt, 50-45 around the board. That was impressive. He gave Khabib a decent fight back in the day earlier in his career. So yeah, Rafael dos Anjos, an absolute legend. Cannot be denied how many savages this guy fought. Let's get on to the next one, guys. We got Dustin Poirier, one of my favorite fighters, guys. Dustin Poirier has been in the gauntlet of lightweight, fighting everybody. If you don't know, Dustin Poirier actually started out as a featherweight. And in the featherweight division, he fought the Korean Zombie, Cub Swanson, and a couple other guys that weren't really notable. And then he decided to go up to lightweight because his weight cut was very tough to featherweight. So he went up to lightweight, and he went on an absolute tear at lightweight, beating guys like Bobby Green. He did lose to Michael Johnson, but then he fought and beat a guy like Jim Miller, beat Anthony Pettis, beat Eddie Alvarez once, beat Max Holloway twice, lost to Khabib, beat Dan Hooker, beat Conor McGregor twice, lost to Oliveira, beat Michael Chandler, beat Justin Gaethje once, lost to Islam. So when you talk about Dustin Poirier, it's unfortunate for him because he had to go through 3 of the greatest lightweight grapplers ever to try and get to the belt, and that's why he failed. He's 0-3. He was submitted in all 3 of his title fights. But man, did he put up good fights. Against Khabib, he was rear naked choked. Against Oliveira, standing rear naked choke. Against Islam, Bravo choke. Literally the 3 best grapplers, arguably ever in MMA, and he had to fight all 3 of them to get to the belt. Unfortunate. I will say he has one of the most legitimate interim belts you'll ever see because he beat Max Holloway for the interim belt, who was on a 13-fight win streak, and he actually has 2 wins against Max Holloway. He's been on the top of the lightweight division in the top 5 since like 2016, 2017, forever, 8+ years. He's faced 7 former champions, and yeah, man, Dustin Poirier, cannot say enough about this guy. One of my favorite fighters, an absolute dog, always goes to war, always gives it his all. It sucks he wasn't able to get the undisputed belt, but when we're talking about strength of schedule, he's up there. He's top 3, top 4. Let's move on to the next one on this list. We got Max Holloway, none other than Jerome. If you don't know, Max Holloway's first name is actually Jerome. There's a fun fact for you. He's a 3-time defending featherweight champion, fought 8 champions or former champions on the top of his division for over 10 years. I mean, Max Holloway made his UFC debut back in, 2013, 2012, when he was like 20 years old. And man, you cannot even compare it to the guys he's fought to some of the other fighters in the UFC. Conor McGregor, Cub Swanson, Charles Oliveira, Anthony Pettis, Jose Aldo twice, Brian Ortega, Dustin Poirier twice, Frankie Edgar, Yair Rodriguez, Alexander Volkanovski 3 times, Arnold Allen, TKZ, Justin Gaethje, Ilya Zepporia. And although he's had some losses in there, he did go on that legendary 13-fight win streak where he did capture the belt, and he has 2 wins over Jose Aldo, who in a lot of people's eyes is the featherweight GOAT. I think it's Volk, but he also had to fight Volkanovski 3 times, and some people think he won the second fight, but Volk proved to be the better fighter. But man, it cannot be denied that Max Holloway absolutely was ahead of his competition. Fun fact also, Max Holloway's never fought a black fighter. If you don't know, now you know. That's an interesting stat. But yeah, man, Jerome Max Holloway, one of my favorite fighters. His KO 12 years into his UFC career against Justin Gaethje this year was absolutely legendary. Love Max Holloway. I hope he makes a lightweight run. But yeah, guys, looking at this guy's strength of schedule, it cannot be underestimated. Max has fought killers his whole career. Let's move on to the next one on this list. we got Jose Aldo. Now, Jose Aldo went on an absolute run from 2005 to 2015. He was undefeated for nearly 10 years on like a 19-fight win streak or something crazy. 25-1, two-time featherweight champ, undefeated for nearly 10 years, as I said, faced 6 former champions. And let's just go through it, man. He started his career, obviously, at featherweight, beat Cub Swanson, brutalized Uriah Faber's legs, destroyed the Korean Zombie, beat Chaz Mendez twice. Second fight was close, but he destroyed him in the first fight. Got KO'd by Conor McGregor, not the best. And then he came back to get his belt against Frankie Edgar. 2 losses against Max Holloway. Came back to beat Renato Moicano. Lost to Volkanovski. Arguably beat Moraes in his bantamweight debut, but he lost. Fought Petr Yan for the bantamweight belt. Beat Marlon Vera. Beat Rob Font. Lost to Marab. So Aldo does have a good bit of losses. He is 7-8 since his Conor McGregor fight, but it cannot be understated that Aldo in the second half, I know coming up he didn't fight the greatest competition, but after his featherweight run was up, like I'd say around after like from the Chad Mendez fight up, he fought absolute savages all the way to the end of his career. Aldo never ducked an opponent. He always tried to fight the best. And yeah, man, I like to see hopefully Aldo retire soon, or if not, I like to see him fight Dominic Cruz in a Legends versus Legend fight. It would have been sick to see him become the bantamweight champ, but you know, Father Time's undefeated. He's 38 now, so yeah, respect to Aldo. Beat some of the greatest fighters to ever exist, but also lost to some. So respect to him. Let's move on to the next one on this list. We got Donald Cowboy Cerrone. Donald Cerrone had one of the most legendary UFC runs, one of the longest careers. He has the second most wins in UFC history behind Jim Miller. He challenged for the lightweight title twice, once against Rafael dos Anjos. I think both times maybe he only challenged once. That might be wrong. He challenged for the lightweight title against Rafael dos Anjos at one point. Donald Cowboy Cerrone was the anyone, anywhere, anytime. He was the originator of that because Donald was fighting 4 or 5 times a year, and he was winning a lot, man. He fought Jim Miller twice, Anthony Pettis twice, Conor McGregor, Justin Gaethje, Tony Ferguson, Leon Edwards, Darren Till, Robbie Lawler, Jorge Masvidal, Matt Brown, Rafael dos Anjos twice, Benson Henderson 3 times, Eddie Alvarez, Edson Barboza, Charles Oliveira. And man, in there, you see him face like, I think 6 former champions. So although Cowboy struggled whenever he got to the top, he never seemed to be able to crack those top fights like for the belt or like for a number 1 contender spot. He was always in there, man. Very skilled. Cowboy had great striking, underrated submissions on the ground. And one of his most satisfying wins was whenever he shut up Alexander Hernandez when he was talking all that smack. That was very entertaining. And yeah, man, Cowboy dared to be great. He dared to challenge himself. He does have a good bit of losses, and he did end his career on a long losing streak. But you cannot deny that whenever this guy was fighting, he did not back down from a challenge. He fought anyone, anywhere, anytime to win or lose. So respect to Donald Cowboy Cerrone. I hope he stays retired. We do not need to see him back. Let's move on to the next one on this list, guys. We got Edson Barboza. Now, Edson Barboza, obviously most famous for his spinning wheel kick KO over Teddy Edom back in like 2012, 2013. One of the greatest KOs in UFC history. But this guy was an absolute marauder, as they say, an absolute dog on the feet, and his striking was legit. I would classify him as a lightweight gatekeeper because he hung around the top 5, top 7 of lightweight for a while, beat some guys, but then he would lose. He definitely fought some stiff competition, and funny enough, even as a striker, this guy went to a decision with Khabib, which in itself is very impressive because Khabib is known to finish strikers like a Conor McGregor, like a Dustin Poirier. So he would finish those guys, but he couldn't get Edson Barboza out of there. So it's pretty impressive that he went to decision with Khabib. Let's look at his notable opponents: Giga Chikadze, Dan Ige, Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker, Kevin Lee, Khabib, Beneil Dariush, Anthony Pettis, Gilbert Melendez, Tony Ferguson, Michael Johnson, Bobby Green, Donald Cerrone. It's like this guy just... Edson Barboza could not catch a break. Bro was always fighting the cream of the crop. Now he's took a step back in competition a little bit since he's moved up to featherweight, but he had a legendary lightweight career. It's kind of interesting he decided to go down to featherweight. I guess it makes sense, and he wasn't the biggest lightweight, and he probably got tired of getting bullied in the wrestling. But either way, I think he had a legendary career. I think he's 38, 39 now. Maybe it's time for him to hang it up. But he's good enough of a striker to give us some entertaining fights. So let's see what happens going forward. Respect to Edson Barboza, one of the craziest strength of schedules we've ever seen, boys. Let's move on to the next one on this list. We got Robert the Reaper Whittaker. Now, Robert Whittaker has been in the UFC forever. 2012, 2013. People actually don't know this, but he fought Stephen Thompson back in the day at welterweight and actually got finished by him. But real ones know Bobby Knuckles started off as a welterweight in the UFC. This guy always fought the boogeyman of the division whenever no one else wanted to. The Yoel Romeros, the the Khamzat Chimaevs, the Jacares, like all those guys that everybody else was scared to fight, Robert Whittaker stepped up and fight. He's been a top contender at middleweight for nearly a decade. This guy's been on top of the middleweight division since I was a teenager, which is crazy. I'm nearly 30 now. Robert Whittaker, notable opponents. He just lost to Khamzat Chimaev. He busted up Paulo Costa, lost to Dricus, beat Marvin Vettori, beat Israel Adesanya in the rematch, in my opinion. Beat Kelvin Gastelum, beat Jared Cannonier, beat Darren Till, beat Yoel Romero twice, or maybe one was a draw, but he got 2 wins over Yoel Romero, beat Jacare Souza, beat Derek Brunson, beat Uriah Hall, beat Brad Tavares. And he actually knocked out Brad Tavares way back in the day when it was more impressive, because Brad Tavares has always been known for like a pretty good chin. I know he's been chinned a couple times, but still. But yeah, man, respect to Bobby Knuckles, fighting the absolute cream of the crop, the top dogs at middleweight, never shying down from a challenge, always fighting the best. And yeah, what else is there to say about Bobby Knuckles? He just always stuck up to the greatest challenge and took it head on. And he's been the middleweight champion. He defended his belt a couple times, and then he lost it to Adesanya. But Robert Whittaker, an absolute bona fide legend, one of the best nicknames in the game, the Reaper. And yeah, he's definitely going to be a UFC Hall of Famer. Enough said about Robert Whittaker. Probably the third, fourth best middleweight of all time. Probably third behind Israel Adesanya and Anderson Silva. Let's move on to the next one, boys. We got Yoel Romero. Now, I know Yoel Romero had a shorter UFC career, but in that career, he actually fought some really stiff competition. And when you can, one thing you have to consider about Yoel is that he came into the UFC at like 35, 36 years old. So most of his guys he was fighting in his prime, he was 40-something years old, which is crazy. Like Yoel fought Israel Adesanya for the belt and arguably beat him at 42 years old. He was absolutely the boogeyman at middleweight. He fought Israel Adesanya, made Israel Adesanya run from him for 5 rounds, but he didn't do much either, so he definitely didn't deserve to win that. Went to an absolute war with Paulo Costa. 2 razor-close decisions against Robert Whittaker. Destroyed Luke Rockhold, destroyed Chris Weidman, close fight with Jacare, destroyed Lyoto Machida, destroyed Brad Tavares, destroyed Derek Brunson. Like, Yoel Romero was so scary because you never knew when he was going to explode. And this guy had so many third-round finishes because his opponents would get tired and Yoel Romero would just come over the top with a freaking flying knee and finish him. Like, this guy was always scary to fight. Even watching his fights, I felt bad for the other guy. I felt nervous for the other fighter. So not the craziest, like, longest strength of schedule, but during the time he was in the UFC, considering he was in his early 40s, it's kind of crazy the level of competition he had to face. Faced 5 former UFC champions as well. That has to be noted. Let's move on to the next one on this list. We got Charles Oliveira. Now, Charles Oliveira has been in the UFC since 2010, which is crazy when you think about it. We're nearly in 2025, nearly 15 years in the UFC. And man, it cannot be stated how crazy his lightweight run was. He went on an 11-5 win streak with 10 finishes to capture the lightweight strap. One of the most entertaining lightweight title runs you'll ever see. And man, he was just finishing everybody. He has the most finishes and most submissions in UFC history. He's been in the UFC since 2010, faced 4 former champions. Notable opponents, he's fought Michael Chandler twice, Arman Tsarukyan, Beneil Dariush, Islam Makhachev, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Tony Ferguson, Kevin Lee, Jim Miller 2 times, Anthony Pettis, Max Holloway, Frankie Edgar, Cub Swanson, Donald Cerrone. Like, when you just look at the guys that Charles Oliveira's faced, and I know he was labeled as a quitter early in his career when he was younger, because a lot of times he would give up. But man, he shut down that narrative on his championship run. He came back to show, even if he gets dropped to the ground, he's dangerous everywhere. He can finish you. And yeah, man, Charles Oliveira, just a bona fide legend. One of the fan favorites of the lightweight division. Arguably second or third all-time lightweights. Just insanity. Probably put him third behind Khabib and Islam. But yeah, man, Charles Oliveira is one of the most beloved fighters for a reason. He goes for the kill, the finish every time. He's one of the most skilled fighters. He's good on the feet, good on the ground. Most submissions. It's like, this guy deserves his flowers, and he's gotten them. So respect to Charles. Crazy strength of schedule for him. Let's move on to the next one, guys. We got Kelvin Tubby Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum now, he gets a lot of stuff these days for not being disciplined, and he should. But man, he fought some tough opposition. If he stayed disciplined throughout his career, he arguably could have became champion or stayed in the top 5 of the divisions. But Kelvin was too worried about eating tacos and McDonald's every day instead of training. So he faced 6 former champions. At one point, he did face Israel Adesanya for the interim middleweight championship and nearly won that fight. That was an absolute war. But his notable opponents, Sean Brady, Jared Cannonier, Robert Whittaker, Jack Hermanson, Darren Till, Israel Adesanya, Jacare Souza, Michael Bisping, Chris Weidman, Vitor Belfort, Johnny Hendricks, Neil Magny, Tyron Woodley, Uriah Hall. Like, Kelvin Gastelum has not gotten it easy. And he's a little bit older now, and I think he's past his prime for sure. He looked terrible against Sean Brady. He got absolutely exposed. And just in the last few years, Kelvin Gastelum, the competition seems to have passed him up, so I don't think he can do much these days in either division of welterweight or middleweight. He probably should hang it up, but maybe there's some fun fights left for him to have. I just feel like he's taken too much damage over the years, and yeah, man, whenever you're in the UFC since 2010 or 2011, like a Kelvin Gastelum, it's like, who knows, man? He might just have burnout. Who knows? Either way, respect to Gastelum. Fought absolute dogs his entire career. Let's move on. Nobody said anything about dogs, bro. Let's move on to Anthony Pettis. Showtime. Now, this is the only fighter that ever made it on the Wheaties box, boys. So show some respect, because this guy faced 5 former UFC champions, and he was the UFC lightweight champion at one point. First guy to KO Wonderboy, which was crazy. A Superman punch to KO Wonderboy. Former UFC lightweight champion, as I mentioned. He faced Donald Cerrone twice, Stephen Thompson, Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier, Jim Miller, Max Holloway, Charles Oliveira, Edson Barboza, Eddie Alvarez, Rafael dos Anjos, Gilbert Melendez, Benson Henderson. And although Pettis did struggle in his career after winning the belt, there's something to be said about his success. Like, this guy was so successful that he's getting on cereal boxes, and he had the Showtime kick against Benson Henderson in WEC back in the day. Like, his title run was absolutely legendary, but after the Dos Anjos fight, he just couldn't put it together anymore, man. I think the competition just passed him up. He had slick submissions, but his wrestling defense wasn't ever the greatest. It felt like people can take him down quite easily, so that was his demise in a lot of his fights. But respect to Anthony Pettis, man. Gave us an absolute war, so that's all you can really say about Anthony Pettis. And yeah, hopefully he hangs it up soon, because he's got some losses in the PFL now. He's like 38, 39. Nothing else to prove, Anthony Pettis. You're a legend, brother. Let's move on. Junior Dos Santos, now a heavyweight. We're talking about heavyweights. Junior Dos Santos might have faced the greatest competition of any fighter ever. I mean, when you look at his resume, he's faced like 2 or 3 of the greatest heavyweights ever. He's fought 3 generations of dangerous heavyweights. He was the former UFC heavyweight champion. He was the first guy to beat Cain Velasquez. 5 former champions on his resume. So he's fought Fabricio Verdum twice, Cyril Gane, Jairzinho Rozenstruik, Curtis Blades, Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis, Stipe Miocic twice. He actually has a win over Stipe, if you guys don't know. Alistair Overeem, Cain Velasquez 3 times, Frank Mir, Shane Carwin, who was the boogeyman at the time, knocking out everybody, Mirko Krokop. So, man, when we talk about Junior Dos Santos, although like a lot of these other guys, he did lose a good bit towards the end of his career, he was able to capture the heavyweight strap at one point, and this guy just fought killers after killers at heavyweight. I know it's heavyweight and they aren't that skilled, but there's something to be said about fighting these extremely dangerous guys and never stepping down from a challenge. Junior Dos Santos is an absolute legend. I think he should be in the UFC Hall of Fame if he isn't already. Never stepped down, always fought the toughest competition. And yeah, man, Junior Dos Santos, what a career, what a guy. And I think he fought in boxing recently. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's move on to the next one, boys. We got Kamaru, the Nigerian Nightmare Usman. Now, Kamaru Usman's on the lower end of this list. He had a pretty decent competition he's faced, and the fact that he went 15-0 before losing to Leon is quite impressive. Considering the competition he faced. But the issue with Kamaru Usman is he had a lot of rematches. He fought Leon Edwards 3 times, Colby Covington twice, Jorge Masvidal twice. Of course, he had that fight against Chimaev last year where he looked really good. He beat Gilbert Burns. He took the belt off of Tyron Woodley, dominated Rafael dos Anjos. I think he got his back taken by Damian Maia and survived and got off of it, which was quite impressive. Or the fight actually might have got stood up while Damian Maia was on his back, which is insane. And he actually has a TKO win against Sean Strickland back in the day. He's a 5-time defending welterweight champion. He's obviously the second best welterweight of all time behind GSP. He was the boogeyman of welterweight coming up. Nobody wanted to fight this guy. Whenever Kamaru Usman's name come up, they're like, nah, I don't want to fight that guy, man. He's got too good of cardio. He's too high of a pressure fighter. He's going to dominate me. And that's what he was, man. Coming up, he was just the guy who dominated everybody with his wrestling and just his cardio. And yeah, man, respect to Kamaru Usman. 15-0 start in his UFC career. He's now on a 3-fight losing streak. Sucks to see it. He was 1 fight from tying Anderson Silva's record and 2 fights from beating it. So if he would have defended his belt against Leon Edwards and then went on to beat one more guy, we're talking about one of the greatest UFC fighters ever. 17-0 at the start of a UFC career would be nuts. But either way, not the longest list of guys because he had a lot of rematches, but Kamaru Usman had a legendary career. He still can win some fights. We'll see what happens, but yeah, man, no matter what, he's a bona fide legend. Throw him in the Hall of Fame. Face some absolute dogs in his career. Let's move on to Dan Henderson for the old heads, boy. Dan Henderson, guys, across multiple promotions, has fought absolute killers everywhere. You talk about Dan Henderson, faced over 10 former UFC champions, which is absolutely nuts. He had insane longevity and the oldest fighter to ever fight for a title. The legendary H-Bomb, guys, you know it. fought Michael Bisping twice, arguably beat him both times. Nobody talks about this, but at UFC 204, Michael Bisping better be lucky it's not off of damage, because Dan Henderson destroyed his face. Michael Bisping won off of points, and he was 46 years old. To perform like that at 46 is crazy. I know it's Bisping, but still. He actually got a knockout over Hector Lombard when he was 45 in the UFC, which is crazy. Fought Vitor Belfort twice, Gegard Mousasi, Daniel Cormier, Shogun Rua twice. Some of the best fights you'll ever see against Shogun. Rashad Evans, Lyoto Machida, Fedor. He actually knocked out Fedor, which was crazy at the time. Rich Franklin, Anderson Silva, Rampage Jackson, Vanderlei Silva, Antonio Nogueira. Like, Dan Henderson, across his 25-plus MMA career, fought absolute bona fide legends, and he's a legend himself, man. I think he's in the UFC Hall of Fame. I think his fight with Shogun is, one of his fights is, but he deserves to be in the UFC Hall of Fame. He never became a UFC champion, but man, did he come close against Bisping. I know he didn't deserve the shot, and because he was number 14 and 46 at the time, but he got the shot, and he arguably beat Michael Bisping. So respect to Dan Henderson. Fought absolute legends across his entire career. Like, this guy was just the legend fighter of all legend fighters. So respect to him. Hope he's been enjoying retirement these last, 6 or 7 years. And yeah, man, let's move on to the last one. Jon Jones. Yeah, guys, I know that I gave a lot of Jon Jones hate on this channel, and I do still think his resume is a little overrated, but when we talk about facing former champions and being the youngest UFC champion and being unbeaten technically on paper, although I think he's lost the fight to Dominic Reyes, Jon Jones has faced amazing competition his entire career. Even if some of the wins are a little overrated because they were pride middleweight old heads, but there's something to be said about the longevity of Jon Jones beating Stipe Miocic, beating a Cyril Gane, beating a Dominic Reyes, Thiago Santos, Alexander Gustafsson twice, Daniel Cormier twice, but one was a no contest to PEDs. Glover Teixeira when he was on a 25 win streak. Vitor Belfort almost got submitted, came back to submit him. Dominated Rashad Evans, finished Lyoto with a brutal submission, submitted Rampage Jackson, knocked out Shogun for the belt, took Ryan Bader's undefeated record. Like, Jon Jones has had a legendary career. Although I say that people overrate it a little bit sometimes, there's something to be said about facing the absolute craziest of competition from when you're 23 to when you're 37 years old. So I can't say respect to Jon Jones because he is a freaking steroid user, but he has a good strength of schedule. He's fought amazing guys all the way throughout his career. So, for the most part, some of the guys when he was younger were old heads, but he did beat him when he was at a younger age. So I guess there is something to be said about that. And yeah, guys, that's it. The UFC fighters with the craziest strength of schedule, the guys that fought the absolute best competition their entire career, win or lose. Some of these guys went undefeated, like Jon Jones, and some of these guys lost a bunch of fights. But either way, no matter what, they fought the best of the best, and there's something to be said about that. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Who else would you add to this list that I didn't put on here? Who else has crazy good strength of schedule that I didn't mention? And yeah, man, if you're in the United States or any other country that celebrates Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. I appreciate all the support on the videos. I am thankful today for my wife and my YouTube channel. So I want to give a shout out to those two things. Thank you guys. You guys have been incredible for supporting the channel. The streams have been amazing. The subscribers, the comments, the members. Thank everybody, man. You guys are amazing. You're changing my life. And I love doing this content and making this stuff. So thank everyone that watches. And I'm out, man. Peace.